Okay, let me stop sharing. Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys so much for attending this workshop for the Climb. For those who don't know, I'm Felicia Smith. I am the founder and chairperson of the Climb. The Climb is a 501c3 that is committed to increasing the number of women of color in leadership in managerial positions in both private and public sector. We kicked off the Climb on March 8th, and this is our first official event that's a part of one sector of our organization called the Boardroom. And the Boardroom really is our professional development and training arm. And it's really focused on hitting those pain points that women of color are facing in their sector, right? And so this is a good example of something that's very unique that you may not see at every organization that we're having. And it's really about DE&I, and how it has benefited, or has it benefited, women of color. And so I'm super excited to have this panel tonight. This is something we are hearing so much about. We're hearing about over 30 states who have some kind of legislation, whether already passed or in the works, about banning state DE&I. And a lot of us hear DE&I, we kind of know what it is, but I knew that I was not capable of having a very fulsome conversation about it. And I wanted to bring some people in the room who have been studying this, who are experts, who can provide us a little bit more clarity and a little bit more information about DE&I and then how we move forward as women of color. And so I'm going to start off by introducing our panel. And then we're going to move right into questions. So I will start off with Amma, the exclusion lady. So Amma is a dynamic inclusion advisor, coach, and speaker with over 15 years experience in corporate human resources management, inclusion, and training for Fortune 100 nonprofit and university clients. Known as the inclusion lady, Amma is not just a sought after speaker and certified master facilitator. She is a force for change, promoting accountability and awareness around inclusion. Her story exemplifies the transformative power of advocacy and positive impact one person can have on race and culture. She goes beyond the ordinary, using storytelling to create awareness that transforms behavior, adds genuine value, and positively impacts the organization. She has taught for professional associations like the Society for Human Resources Management, the Institute for Management Accountants, and the National Association for African Americans in Human Resources, the White Privilege Conference, and many more. Amma is known for high energy, high interactive workshops, and believes in training and coaching is a moment to remove distractions and create a safe space to have real and substantive conversations. Let's welcome Amma. Amma, could you give us a little bit about your background? And also, Amma has an event coming up that's actually tonight, right after this one. So if you could go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you. Thank you for such a great introduction. Yes, I am Amma. I'm known as that inclusion lady. Um, Global, experience, MBA, finance background. So I really approach this work from an objective lens, and which allows me to then bring the human lens to DEI, and I like to add the B piece to it. So my event tonight is a virtual watch party. We are going to be watching Deconstructing Karen. I don't know if you're familiar with the workshop. And so we're doing a virtual watch party. We're going to have a conversation about it. It's on Zoom. And so you'll have the information, but really talking about deconstructing your white supremacy ways that we are all exposed to. And so it's going to be a very fun event. Bring your pajamas and your Pinot. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much, Amma. I actually have the flyer and I'm going to put it up in just a second. I've also put in the chat for anyone who is interested, the event for tonight, if you would like to go ahead and register for it. Our next panelist is Miss Brittany Cole. So Miss Brittany Cole lives by the model as a TEDx speaker, coach, and leader consultant, and the author of the best-selling book on redefining resilience and thrive through it. And that actually is the book that we're going to be giving away tonight. We have 5 copies. We already have 1 copy that we're going to give away to the very first person who logged in, but we also are going to give away 4 other copies based on those who are interacting in the chat and for question area, but this is her book. Through her losses and experiences as a former commercial leader in the healthcare industry, Brittany has learned what it means to navigate change, challenge, and loss with authenticity, purpose, courage, and joy. She is the CEO of Career Thrivers, a leadership development firm that partners with organizations to cultivate a culture where everyone can thrive through Career Thrivers work with executives and teams to retain diverse talent and enhance engagement and develop inclusion leaders for an equitable workforce. She's a graduate of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and she studied strategies for building and leading diverse organizations at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's also a member of my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, hello soror, and the Association of Women Business Owners, and serves on the board of directors for the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville, Brain Trust, and Cable Leadership Organization. She also serves as a mentor with the Pathways Women's Business Center and a former coach for the TEDx Nashville. Please welcome Brittany.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled, one, to learn, to share, to be challenged. So certainly invite you to, in the comments, come off mute, engage in this conversation. It's always better together, and certainly, again, honored to be here to get to share with these brilliant minds tonight. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, and then we have our next panelist, Mrs. Sean Collins. Sean Collins is a dedicated DE&I practitioner specializing in fostering diversity and inclusion within the Department of Defense with a proven track record of driving positive change, and she's committed to advocating for women of color in the workplace. Please welcome Ms. Sean Collins.
Thank you all, and thank you for the invitation. I am really looking forward to the event of great conversation and thought-provoking challenges and solutions, and how we see ourselves, women of color, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker, but last but not least, because it's good to have a mix of females and male, and Cam, for me, is a part of the family. So welcome, Cam. He is the founder and CEO of Black Men in Tech Incorporated. He also is a diversity executive in the tech space, where he has designed and implemented comprehensive DE&I strategies across the globe. Cam believes diversity cannot be achieved without commitment. I'm sorry, let's start over. Diversity can be achieved without commitment. Inclusion cannot. It requires a step beyond tolerance, vulnerability, and trust to create an inclusive environment. He has been recognized by Forbes as a Forbes The Culture 50 Champions, Rising Star, and as a STEM influencer. His passion and purpose for inclusivity is fueled by the strides he has made to personally and professionally elevate underrepresented voices. Cam's personal mission is to prepare individuals to thrive in a diverse and interconnected world. Let's give a warm welcome to Cam.
Thank you so much, you all, for the invite tonight. I'm happy to sit at your table and be a learner as I share points of diversity with you all.
Awesome. So I want to dive right in. So we talked a little bit about in the beginning, and as I ask these questions, I want each of the panelists to feel free to dive in and kind of talk about the topic. But we're going to start from the beginning. And some of this discussion actually came from an article that Brittany wrote. So I'm looking forward to Brittany's insight on this one about really the start in the history of DE&I. When we talk about DE&I recently, we're talking about it. We always talk about it in the George Floyd era and all the commitments we saw in that piece. But really, I'd like to have a more fulsome conversation about DE&I, its start, and how it's evolved. Because as I've done some research, DE&I started back in like the 1960s, and where we went from racial discrimination to it having a more inclusive, that include, not just race, but ethnicity, all those things. So if you guys can share a little bit about its evolution and what you think that's meant for the work in general.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to kick off the conversation, and thank you again for having me and for reading the article and sharing it. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn. It's free, available to anyone, called, you guessed it, Let's Thrive Together. But yeah, I think there is an important layer of the conversation that's being left out of many of the headline recent conversations around DE&I, and that's two things. One, the fact that when we look historically at every movement in history, every movement always has a counter movement, always. That's one. Two, I think the other part of the conversation that's often left out is the fact that this work on July 2nd of this year will be 60 years old. And so the only reason why we talk about diversity in the context of a corporate setting is because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so if you go back and say, okay, well, there's been 6 decades of this conversation. What has changed since then? What did it take to even get to that point? I think there's a lot that we can learn. There are lots of best practices. There are lots of business cases. There's a lot of academic research and data around what works and what doesn't. And I think the current trends and backlash that we're hearing is different in some ways. But I also like to remind people that 2 of probably the most celebrated leaders in the US anyway, JFK and MLK, were assassinated right around the same time that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, one right before and one a few years after. And so I think when we consider our history in America with the topic of diversity, which is a fact, no one is doing diversity work. I don't do diversity work. No one here does diversity work. Diversity just is, it's different. But the work of inclusion and equity has always been the struggle. And I think we still have a long way to go. But I think it's important that we recognize that only one generation ago. So my dad is 73. Most people work with someone that's over 60. So when we talk about the span with which most Fortune 500s have been in existence, well over 60 years, and the timeline, one generation, by which discrimination was found to be illegal in the US, it's also young in its change management journey. So I think those are 2 kind of thoughts that we have to keep in mind around the work.
Wow, that's awesome. Sometimes we think of things as, being such a long time, but when you do think of it in the terms of some of our parents, right, and they're still being in the workforce, that makes a big difference. Any other panelists want to add on to that?
So plus one, everything Brittany said. The only thing I'll add is, I often talk about, and I hear other practitioners talk about DEI in like a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 approach. And so I will say that 1.0, like I remember my aunts talking about diversity training in the 90s. And it really started around like sexual harassment, like just some of the real basic compliance things we do now. And I would say that DEI 1.0 was probably around like gender, right? We did a lot of focus on gender and really trying to get women, pulled up the ladder and pulled up the ranks. And 2.0, which I find the most resistance with, is race and culture. And that 2.0 really started happening more so, like you said, around the George Floyd time. But now I'm starting to see, and I don't know about my colleagues, but I'm starting to see a shift. Like organizations want to start shifting away from the race and culture conversation to more of the accessibility, disability, and neurodivergence conversation. And so I'm seeing a lot of that as far as like the diversity 3.0. And it's just really interesting how it keeps changing. And I have people ask me like, so what do you think is going to happen with DEI? I'm like, the name's going to change, but the work's going to stay the same. Because as Brittany said, this work's been around for almost 60 years. So it's going to continue.
So I'm going to ask,
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
Piggyback on what both Anna and Brittany said, diversity happens. It's part of how we show up, who we are, how we integrate into the workforce. I think the 2.0, where we're starting to see more around accessibility and trying to get away from the word diversity, it stems from really focusing on inclusion. We really talk about inclusion because when you have inclusion and you're being inclusive, it's everyone. It's race, gender, various nationalities. What we're hearing also around accessibility and diversity is actually how does it impact mission? Because it's thought that it's just representation. Diversity is just representation. And we are really foot stomping that it starts with representation. But the real value in diversity is how we provide, how we show up and add value to the mission, be it industry or federal government.
I'll ask a question that's a little divisive. So in the research, when they were talking about in the 1960s when they started, DE&I, that one of the primary focuses was on racial discrimination. And as it expanded to have gender and all those other categories, did it dilute the ultimate focus? So what are your thoughts on whether or not with the expansion of accessibility, neurodiversity, all those things, does it dilute racial discrimination?
I'll jump in first on this one. I think, I don't think it diluted. I just think it distracts from the real goal of making sure everyone have an even playing field. My personal belief is that everybody has a pocket in diversity. Everyone should be treated and shouldn't be the oppression Olympics where one segment of the population is worse off than someone else at the same time. Race and culture is probably the toughest things for individuals to grasp because it's so different. It's so nuanced. It's not a bucket. It's not a box. You can't check it off. My culture and my blackness is different from everyone else's blackness. My heritage and my understanding. And when people, meaning majority, can't understand it easily, they want to change it, right? So it's easy for gender. It's easier to understand gender. It's even easier to understand neurodivergent and disability because that makes sense. And guess what? Most people in power that are the majority, they have some type of interaction with these individuals every day. Everyone has someone that's different in their family that is a woman, non-binary, that sort of thing. You may have someone with a disability, seen and or unseen in their family. Everybody don't got a black person in their family. Everyone don't have an Asian person in their family. Everyone doesn't have a Hispanic person in their family. So it's so different that they don't want to understand it. They meaning the majority. So when you get away from the issue, it's not really the issue, it's more so what I don't want to deal with today. And even though we're all inclusion practitioners, belonging practitioners, we still don't have enough power to control the conversation in a way that's going to move our culture forward. So for me personally, and this is my personal belief system, it changes because individuals that still have power and privilege still controls the narrative, even though we're doing the work of teaching individuals how to understand and appreciate cultures for who and what they are.
Yeah,
That's
Cam,
good.
I couldn't agree more with that. And so just two really quick things. When we think about diversity, I'm sure most people have heard the analogy like asking someone to the party, inviting someone to the party, asking them to dance. So in my opinion, just my opinion, like the 1964 realm into like the 90s is really like, okay, we have to let them come to our dance, right? Like that's what it felt like, and that's what the diversity focus felt like. And now we're saying, yeah, but how are you asking them to dance? Like, how are you leveraging their brilliance? And here is the other piece that I like to talk to my clients about. Like, yes, you might not feel comfortable talking about race and culture, and we can talk about all the other things, gender, we can talk about gender expression, we can talk about neurodivergence and everything. But guess what? When I'm looking at those numbers, I am still going to analyze it by intersectionality, because that still represents a different lived experience. And when you're talking about products and your balance sheet and who you want to gain as market share, you got to look at who your people are, who's buying your products. They want to see themselves and where that market share is. So you need that brilliance to create these products and services to make your bottom line and to grow. And so that is why race and culture is still very much a thing that I personally talk about, because even with all of these experiences, the lived experience of the intersectionalities still matter.
Two things that I would add, Felicia, on that question. So when I wrote the article, so the title is "Before You Post or Get on the Mic About DEI, Read This First." And I went with that headline because I was writing a different article about like the current state in terms of legislation, and you spoke to this kind of where things are right now from a political standpoint, and then reminding people that this work started politically. So all of the disassociation with like, oh, I'm at work and like I don't talk about politics. Well, we wouldn't be talking about diversity if we didn't have legislation that made it, that introduced it initially punitively, right? And then you had this kind of evolution of EEOC, which we talked about, assimilation, fostering sensitivity, and then in the new millennium, oh, DEI is good for business, Deloitte, McKinsey, all of these management consulting firms showing the actual bottom line impact of racial diversity, of gender diversity. And so Charlemagne the God had this kind of viral quote conversation about that's very connected to this question, you know. And I think two things are important. One, I don't have the background of a human resource officer. I spent 12 years at Pfizer before I started Career Thrivers as a commercial leader. And I used to shy away from that fact. I used to shy away from like, oh, I've never really been in HR. So like, you know, I'm passionate about this work, but can I really do this work? And I think the difference in the way that we approach this work is that we approach it like a business function. So if we take DEI off the table and we think about how most sales leaders approach sales, a couple of things are true. One, when you're allocating budget resources across a division, across a region, you don't allocate them equally. You don't say, oh, we've got a $2 million budget and we've got, you know, 25 districts and let's split it up evenly. No, you look at the market dynamics in each of the territories and you equitably distribute the budget based on the return that you think you're going to get specific to the needs of that specific territory. The other thing that I would say is the other thing that you do in business, every other function of the business, right? When you're looking at a change management process, there are usually steps by which you go about initiating change. And so I think when we get back to the root of why we even talk about the D word, right? That again is work that no one is doing, but the work of inclusion and equity, I think many organizations, one of the challenges have taken a tactical approach to the work, right? So what does that look like? Well, in 2020, shareholders, social media, the public, customers, clients were asking, what are you doing around racial diversity? And then the reactionary response with many organizations was to go grab someone's unconscious bias training, which we know from the data isn't as effective. And then the sentiments often are like, well, we've spent 2 years talking about race, let's kind of move on to the next thing. And I think if you look at the way that businesses work when you're trying to implement change, you are specific, you are intentional, you are strategic. And I think a lot of those things are missing. The last thing that I would say about the dance, you know, analogy, and shout out to Brene Myers, who led this work beautifully at Netflix for many years, just recently retired from there. I think the broader question in that analogy is who gets to determine the invite list. And when we think about the work of DE&I, we think about it as a core competency of leadership development, right? And so before you can say, well, is this a diverse dance? You know, are people being invited to the dance floor? Oftentimes the bigger question is who gets to say who gets to come in the first place, and who is at that leadership table, and is there representation at the leadership level of the people that are going to be on the dance floor? And oftentimes, as is the case with women of color, I know we'll talk about this, that's where the biggest gap is. We're not represented in leadership. We're not represented at the decision-making table. We don't have a say in who gets to come to the dance. And so we stay in this, oh, we're doing diversity because we're doing all this tactical programming instead of really being strategic and approaching it the way that we approach every other business function in most enterprise corporations.
That was an amazing segue, actually. Thank you. To the part where we talk about women of color in DE&I. And so the question really comes up when we talk about DE&I, we talked about how it was a government-based thing. With the dismantling of it state by state, how does that, or does it impact women of color, number one? And number two, how have women of color even benefited from DE&I? Everyone's thinking? Am I spinning? Can you hear me?
So I'm happy to come off mute.
Okay.
I answered last time, so I was like, let me
Yes, my
let me
question
give
was
some
too heavy.
room.
The panel was like, oh no. You just
I
threw
was
a whole
trying to
bunch
give
on
some
the table.
space.
Brittany, I was doing the same thing. Like, wait, I feel like I just spoke, trying to leave space.
Yeah,
and
so
I
I'll
thought
kick
it
us off
wasn't
quickly.
appropriate for me to start the question, so I was like, I'll wait till somebody else jump in, and then I'll layer on.
And Kim, that actually brings up a good point before you start is about this discussion, because we had a similar discussion at work and we begin to talk about women of color. And the first thing it was a man that jumped in and they were like, wait a minute, why would you jump in
Okay,
first?
listen.
You're not a woman of color. So
Listen, I'm a former chief
I'm so
diversity
glad that you were
officer.
very in tune with that and aware.
Yeah, I wasn't starting it. I'll layer on, but I wasn't starting it.
So Brittany, go ahead.
Well, this is an interesting question. And so I have my opinion and then there's the data. So I'm going to speak to the data. So Lean and McKinsey for the last 9 years have done this Women in the Workplace study. They just published their 9th edition, October of last year, that reported out on the intersectional experiences of women in corporate America. It's the largest study that looks at the experiences of women in corporate America. And they reported out on two main things. One, overall, when you look at women in the C-suite, the representation of women at the C-suite level is the highest that it's ever been. All right. And so connected to the following question or the previous question of like, are we diluting the work as we add in other dimensions of difference? I think one of the challenges with that data point is that most organizations would run with that headline and say, hey, we're doing great on DE&I because look at how women are represented in the C-suite. We're making more space for women to be in senior level leadership positions. But then the next line of the study says that there is a persistent underrepresentation of women of color. And note there that, and the study does disaggregate the data, but women of color is still a collective. If we're talking about Black women, and often the conversation around this whole topic is like, well, who exactly are we talking about? Which dimensions of diversity are we speaking about? Because women of color is still a grouping of dimensions of diversity. So when you look at the drop off of first level leadership, and they reference it as being the broken rung, no surprise to this group, right? But women have the highest cliff in terms of the drop off between the representation of entry level women and then women who make it to that first level of leadership. And then you just see the impact on the pipeline all the way down to the C-suite. So the data would tell us that over the last 9 years, at least, there has not been a lot of change for women of color. That's what the data would say. And I'll go on mute and leave space for my other panelists.
I would 100% agree. And when we look at the data, we see how DEI has propelled white women, and it tends to open up more doors. Even though we see a pipeline, a significant pipeline for management and C-suite opportunities, they're just not coming through for Black women in particular. And it's industry, private industry, and you see the same thing in government. And what we also see is the women that are in C-suite or leadership positions across government, they're so few that there's not a lot of support to advocate for times out of 10, they tend to leave a trip earlier than their male counterparts or their white counterparts. So once you get there, it's how do you feel comfortable being authentic and staying there?
You know, I was on a search committee for a colleague who was coming in as a chief human resource officer, and we had three top candidates. It was a male, it was a white male, white female, and a black woman, right? I talked to my CEO and we was discussing the candidates, and because he wanted, yeah, I'm gonna say it, because he wanted diversity, right? And he wanted someone of color, right? He was leaning towards first he was leaning towards the white woman, and then he was leaning more towards the black woman because of course black women came in and killed the interview. Like the interview was done when she was finished with it, right? And he asked me a question, and as his direct report, he asked me a question as a diversity officer. He asked me, he was having a real vulnerable moment, and he had asked me a question, and that prompted me to think, you think this black woman gonna come in and you think she's gonna be safe for you, right? And it prompted that in my mind because of the line of question that he asked. So when he hired her, and we hired her, she came in and did exactly what she needed to do. She redid HR, redid the structuring, set the team up for success. And I remember a conversation with the CEO about I just don't get her. I just don't get her. Like and then I'm just like, oh, so you thought she was safe, right? But that black woman had the toughest 90 days out of any C-suite individuals that joined our team, our immediate executive team, because not only was she black, she was also a woman, and she was also allowed or thought to be one of them, meaning that, oh, she's safe, she's a black woman, it's okay. And she came in, ready to do the work. So what we had to do was we had to support her, like, all the leaders that were black, that was either C-suite or SVPs, we rallied around her to make sure she did not fail, right? And that's some of the toughest part about elite is black women entering corporate spaces at executive levels or director levels or change or hiring managers, because at times when people think you're the safe bet, you end up being the person that's going to make true change in the job, and what they thought they was getting, they don't no longer get anymore, and that scares them the most.
Wow, that's powerful. That's good. Amma, you had something?
Yeah, so just a couple of nuanced things I make sure when I'm engaging with my clients. So, of course, everything everyone said is brilliant. This is just a little sprinkle on top because I don't know if it's petty, but I like to be specific and intentional with our words. And so, when they're talking about women of color, people of color, I often ask and I lean in and ask, who specifically are you talking about, right? Because there are, again, different lived experiences with these different race and ethnicities. That's why the DOL and the Bureau of Labor Statistics breaks information down by these subgroups. And so when I think about have things gotten better from a feeling perspective, no. From a data perspective, no. Of course, someone can tout like, oh, well, the Department of Labor showed that Black women in 2021 were making 63 cents on the dollar, and now it's 69 cents. So that's progress, right? And it's like, it's not one. So no, right? But two other things I just wanted to add. I often see, because I have that HR background, that they want to hire the Black woman when the department, the system, is so broken. And so then the Black woman's considered to come in and almost be this martyr to fix something that it took years to build. And she has unrealistic expectations, terrible onboarding, terrible training, terrible interview process, and that's who they go with just as the pick. And so oftentimes when you're in these leadership positions, it's important to build structures that will support this. What those structures could look like, what is your onboarding, what is your interview process, and what is your training, mentorship, and sponsorship programs looking like? In addition to that, when I'm coaching Black women, it's like, you need to ask the right questions, because it's not about do I belong here? And oh my God, I'm so lucky to have this title. What are you walking into? And is the culture ready to absorb you? And so it's both. But I will say this from a hopeful standpoint, people are more comfortable in having the conversations now. And that's why I'm hopeful on where this could lead, because I'm seeing, and this is just my personal lens, at least we're at the point where people are saying, no, I feel like this is happening because I'm a Black woman, or I feel this way because it's a microaggression, or this feels uncomfortable because of unconscious bias. Like, at least we have language now. That's the very, very least. We're not there yet, but I'm hopeful when we think about a change management process, because how you tired of talking about race for 2 years, but you talk about safety for 10, right? Like, come on, it's an initiative. Change management is an initiative that takes 5 to 7 years, right? So I'm hopeful by year 5, by year 7, it will be a latent effect, and we will start seeing improvements in the numbers from all the groundwork that's been happening for all of these years. That's a big hope, though. So that's all I'll say.
But you're actually bringing us to the piece I was going to say. So in knowing those pieces and everything you just said, by the way, the chat is lit up. Kristen said that part, Cam. Tori said, yes, that matters. Rika was saying, yes, we're always the saving grace. Brittany said, and fix it fast. And Christy said, preach, Alma. So everyone is kind of in consensus about this. But the question is then, how do women of color, Black women, move forward? How do we, in some ways, utilize or use the right language to make sure that equity inclusion is happening in our workspaces? What should we be thinking about is really the question.
So I think one way that we are seeing Black women move forward in the data is through entrepreneurship. And I know that's not the topic of this conversation, but the fact remains, and I believe there's a tighter correlation than we often hear about. But for the last 7 years, the leading demographic starting new businesses is Black women. And I don't think that that's coincidence. I don't think it's unattached to the experiences that most Black women have at the executive level, mid or entry level in most organizations. And so I think we're seeing Black women being more willing to take risks, whether that risk looks like I can start my own enterprise, I can monetize my skill set on the side, or whether that risk looks like this is not a microaggression, this is a macro, and I'm going to initiate the conversation with my leader in a tactful way, but I'm not just going to let this roll off my back and overthink it and ruminate on it. Like, I'm going to address this. And so I think you're seeing those shifts in the way women operate. I think the other part that's so critical in terms of how we look to approach this work from a strategy perspective, most organizations try to fix the talent. And it's one of the reasons why I left Pfizer. I don't have the entrepreneurship story that I hated my job. I was doing well there, had a long runway, and believe I could go back next week if I wanted to. Worked with phenomenal people there, a wonderful company. And so, but most organizations, so I was doing coaching. Let me connect the dots to the story. While I was at Pfizer, I was side hustler, right? So I was coaching and speaking and working with primarily with women, primarily with Black women. And it just started to get to a point to realize that, like, you can only really coach someone so far. Like, we can have all the coaching in the world, all the resources in the world, all the own your power, use your voice, personal brand, executive presence, all of that, right? But if you are not in a culture where you can thrive, it, like, you're fixing the wrong end of the stick. And so I think with many organizations, when they're thinking about this work, and we saw this in 2020 and 2021, everyone rushed to recruit to meet the numbers, right? And that's really not the pipeline problem that most organizations have. Most organizations have a leaky pipe and a clogged pipe. Either your talent, your diverse talent is stuck, is clogged at entry level, or they're leaving. The attrition is 2 to 4 times your overall attrition because they're having a bad experience. So the issue isn't the diverse talent. The issue is not the women of color. The issue is not the Black women. The issue is in the middle. It's the people leaders who oftentimes are a completely different group. And so I think when we think about what are things that women can do, Black women in those roles, right? I think there's a responsibility on executive leaders to recognize that we have to train and develop leaders to lead. We can't just promote the best performer, right? That's traditional promotion one-on-one in most corporate organizations. Oh, they're performing well, let's elevate them to a leader. And they don't know how to bring the best out of other people, let alone people that aren't like them. So one, you have to be intentional about leadership development. But the other thing that I think we have to equip more Black women and women of color to do is to bring your manager along in the experiences that you're getting as a diverse talent, right? And that may mean some extra work, some extra hours, some extra emails, but it also is a way that you can lead up and not just your leader, like your leader's leader, to be very intentional about how can we ensure that they're also getting the exposure and the development that they need to lead other women well. Last quick story I'll share on this, and I'll turn my mic on mute. One of my last managers while I was at Pfizer, I was having one of them experiences like, okay, is it just me? Is it him? He had said something kind of sideways. It took me about 2 months to respond. And I was so glad on the other end of that conversation that I went back, even though 2 months had passed, and said, hey, Rob, this happened, here's how I took it. What did you mean by it? And we had a conversation about it. And what really led me to that was this mindset of, I might not be in this role long, which could keep me silent. Like, Brittany, just grin and bear, put the cape on, wear the mask, and just get through it. But the next Black woman that sits in this seat that reports into him, I don't want her to have the experience that I'm having. I don't want her to have to carry home what I'm carrying home. And so I think just that level of boldness, again, whether it's starting your own enterprise or having the boldness to speak up and address, to call in, but also to call out and to lead up, I think those are things that Black women can do to shift not only their experience, but the experiences of other Black women.
So
Brittany,
no, go. I'll wait. Go.
Oh, I was gonna say, Brittany, you made me think about something when you say focusing on the talent, right? So most people do like this talent deficit approach, and it forces you to focus on talent. And so one of the reasons why my focus is not Black women is because Black women aren't the problem. The system is. And what the other problem is, a lot of leaders have never had to learn how to manage the dynamics of difference, right? So TD Jakes has this quote, and he said, I couldn't get a GED without learning about you, but you can get a PhD without learning about me. And so this is where I step in, and why my audience is primarily white women, right? Like, let's work our way up the ladder. And so when we talk about building these systems and structures, let's talk about, one, how you're going to advocate for other people. Two, how are you going to assess talent? Like, let's really talk about what that looks like. Let's talk about what your expectations are. What's the process in your organization? We talk about equity, but like, what's the fairness? What's the process and systematic approach to your equity? So then, to your point, you don't have Black women leaving or just stuck in a position or stuck at a particular pay. So when you talk about like, what can Black women do? I'm like, we've been doing so much, right? We've been doing a lot. So what y'all gonna do is the question. What's your systems gonna do? What white women, how are you gonna speak up when you notice inequities and injustices, and when you are the only diversity in the room? How are you also speaking up and advocating for people who should be there, i.e. Black women that are not? So I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went off on a tangent, but Brittany, you got me going there with like focusing on the talent versus focusing on the system and the process.
Yeah, I want to jump in because I think it's two things that you all mentioned, Alma and Brittany, that I want to double tap into. First one is the boldness. I never seen Black people as a whole that's as bold as they are today. Like, literally, I have conversations with people about their job and stuff, and they're like, Cam, I'm leaving. I'm like, where you going? They're like, I don't know, but not here. Right? Like, leaving with no job, like not taking the foolishness. Like, I'm so with it. I wish I was that bold when I first started out. And I appreciate the boldness because we know nonsense. If anything, 2020 taught us that we can work from home. We don't have to see people, and we don't have to smile and just let it roll off our back anymore. So that makes me super excited. Black women, Black people as a whole. The second thing is entrepreneurship. Like, we leave a job now and we're gonna start something, and because of Twitter and TikTok and social media, we make millions of dollars by monetizing our creativity, something that we always had, right? And I think that is important to recognize when you talk about move forward, because long gone are the days when we say, oh, well, we're gonna work this job 20 years and we're gonna get a gold watch and retire peacefully. Long gone that we just gonna put up with it. We say no, we leave and create something and become millionaires and very wealthy and that sort of stuff. So I think personally the path forward, especially with inclusion, is if companies don't get on board, they're gonna lose all their Black talent. And because of that, now they're gonna have products that don't work or don't exist in the Black community. And because our dollar is so strong, they're gonna either have to come back to the table and come back and treat us like we need to be treated, or we're gonna continue to go and make a mill and make cool things and be creative and do this and do it without them. I love this generation. I love the space that we are in now, because for me, it's nothing more freeing to talk to somebody that's going through, a rough patch with a company, and the first thing they say, "Oh, I'm gonna take my severance and leave." They walk the EEOC real quick and say, "Hey, listen, I got this case." Company paid them out, and they go do something amazing. So I think that's what the boldness is for Black women, and then Black men and Black people as a whole. Like, we're in a beautiful space where we're owning and taking ownership of our talents, our treasure, our time, and we're monetizing it for ourselves.
And I think that's representative of the panel for sure. You had something. I know Alma's gonna have to jump
Yeah.
off really quickly for her event.
Yeah. So really quickly, the DOL just came out. So Department of Labor came out with an article saying that the fastest growing number of Black women apprentices is happening now. And so I think it's so interesting that Black women are starting to get back into trades and get apprentices with trades. And, they're making money, like starting off at like 80,000 without a degree, right? So think about that. Black women are the highest educated, but we also have the highest student loan debt, and which makes that the lowest net worth. So you're getting these apprenticeships and you're learning this knowledge paired with entrepreneurship. Like, we're gonna be unstoppable, y'all. That's all I want to say.
No, that is perfect. And that is a perfect segue, yes, to open up the floor to any of our guests who have any questions for the panelists, who want to comment or ask them any questions. We've hit some good questions already. Anyone want to ask the panelists any questions? And we've also put a couple of articles in the chat. So Amma just posted an article. I posted the Lean In Women Workplace in 2023. So please check these out. Really good data pieces when we talk about DE&I. Any questions from the floor? Okay, well, I have then one more. Oh, sorry, Christy raised her hand. Christy, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hello everyone. I've been shouting like preach, amen. You talking right? So I've been glad I've been off mute. But coming off of mute. One of the questions I have, and I don't know, I'm having an experience because I feel like Brittany and Cam in particular is almost like you all were telling my story, like you watched it happen. And I appreciate that, because unfortunately what that does confirm for me is that my experience is very common to the experience that a lot of women have had in corporate America and other professions. My question is, are you seeing with the leadership that you're working with at these companies, at these agencies, are you seeing them take note of how much of their Black talent, particularly Black female talent, is walking out the door or leaving to work at competitors? And are they actually trying to make tangible changes so that they can retain that talent? Or are they just, I believe as Alma said earlier, just playing diversity?
Yeah, so for me, I'll jump in real quick. So for me, it depends on what company you are and who leaders are you talking to, right? Some leaders do, some leaders actually care, but there's a thing that's happening causing a shift in the way that people are employed now. In 2020, everybody hired quick and fast because they needed to adapt to what the Zoom virtual life was about. So people hired in waves, right? So now you guess what? First one in, first one out kind of wave is happening now, where everyone is being let go because they're trimming the fat and becoming more lean as things open up and things go back to the quote unquote new normal, right? So you have companies that say, you know what, here's the opportunity to get rid of all of the diversity that we hired post, summer 2020, with all the innocent people being killed by law enforcement and people. And there's a way out the door. So are they tracking it? In my personal experience, not really. They're happy to trim the fat now as they think, as they hired and made all these gains and said, "Oh, look at me! I have 7% more Black people at the company. I doing this. I promoted this person, that sort of thing." And now they're getting back to what was before 2020 when they were running business the way they wanted to run the business. Now, that is not all companies. A few companies and a few important ones that really cared about diversity prior to summer 2020 and will carry on beyond these lawsuits, which I think is pretty ridiculous. I live in the state of Florida. So which is currently happening. You have some CEOs, some companies that's already ingrained. It's been built from the beginning. Their leadership is really pushing the agenda for us is inclusion and belonging and really doubling down on organizations like myself, like other organizations, and really saying, Kim, how can we tap into your talent? Right. So it's a both. It's some companies are leaning, some companies aren't, but you'll see more companies not than those that are.
Yeah, our sweet spot in our space is tailored leadership development. So most leadership development, billions of dollars is invested in it. Most doesn't work because it lacks a cultural context. So what we work with organizations on, and we work with many Fortune 500s, but having tailored programs that are specific for talent. So like we have a program called Advancing Black Professionals. Guess who that's for? Black professionals. And it's tailored that way. We have an Advancing Women Leaders program. And so those things have been successful. For us, we structure them as sponsorship programs. So it's not just, again, the approach of, oh, let's fix the Black talent. In a cohort of 30 Black leaders, we want their manager and their manager's manager a part of the program, and the managers and managers get inclusive leadership development, training, and support while the Black talent is working on career and leadership development. And so we do have corporations that are still investing in that. We are still getting inquiries for DEI strategic consulting, which surprises me a little bit if you're just tuned into the headlines. But then again, if you think change management process and, oh, we skipped 5 steps in 2020, many organizations are trying to figure out, well, what do we do now? Right. And so they really need support, especially those that are really committed to it. They need support because whatever they tried in 2020 or 2021 either doesn't work or they're shifting it to meet the current need and they don't really know what the next step is. So we are seeing support that way. And then last but not least is coaching. And so we try to take a coaching approach to all of the learning and development curriculum that we create, because usually coaching is reserved on 1 or 2 ends of the spectrum, and Black women or women of color never get access. So it's either you're on a PIP, performance improvement plan, you need to be coached up. That's how coaching gets a negative connotation. Or you're a more executive level leader, so you get access to an executive coach. Most racial and ethnic diverse talent is in the middle, have never been exposed to career leadership coaching, don't know what it's like to have someone outside of the organization to support their journey. And so we work really hard on both ends with the HR and DEI stakeholders, but also with the talent from a DTC perspective to say, hey, here's how you can advocate for yourself for coaching, but here's also how you can retain this talent by providing coaching for them, either in group or one-on-one formats. And so we have a great team of all racially and ethnically diverse coaches that provide coaching at scale to companies. And so we've seen those things continue to be sustainable in this space.
That in Brittany, I also wanted to share, Brittany, you actually have an event that's coming up soon also for women. If you'd like to share with us a little bit about the event, and I'm trying to bring up a flyer.
Sure, it's our Rise and Thrive program. So it's called Rise and Thrive Advancing Women Leaders, and it's for emerging women leaders inside of organizations. We work with HR teams to have women nominated to be a part of the program. They come to Nashville or depending on, sometimes the organization wants us to come to their city, which also works. But our biggest one, they come to Nashville for a 3-day leadership development intensive, followed up with 6 months of coaching and leadership labs delivered virtually. So that in-person intensive will be May 8th through the 10th. And you can check out riseandthrivewithus.com to apply to the program, or if you know of a woman leader that maybe could benefit from it, all the details are there.
And I will send that flyer to all the participants because me being technology challenged could not pull it up while I had you guys pinned. So I'm going to leave the opportunity for you all to give your final comments, starting with Amma, because I know she has her event, her watch party that's going to be at 8 o'clock right after this. So please log in if you can. But go ahead with your final comments from the panel.
Yeah, I would say lead with data, follow with passion. And so I am a certified EEOC investigator. That is typically my end to talk about, what are your terminations looking like? What did your layoffs look like? What was your strategy for that? Let's break that down by demographics. Let's look at performance reviews. Let's look at the feedback in performance reviews. Like there's software out there that can do that. So you can lead with the data and let people see what it is. That's typically what I do with my consulting firm. And then from that information, follow with the passion and the anecdotes. But just remember, like each one of you have a lot to contribute. And if you feel something, if you see something, say something, but say something along, depending on who the people are, find the data to support how you're also feeling, because it does typically, in my experience, build a beautiful case on you got to do this, or it can be an EEOC claim easily. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Alma, for joining us.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you
All right,
so
everyone.
much. Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.
Brittany?
So in a room full of 40 white men, diversity is present. So diversity is a fact, inclusion is an act, and equity is in the stats. So the goal of this work is to help leaders lead everyone, so that the work of DE&I isn't only impacting the workforce, but it also hits the marketplace, it also hits the business, and it also impacts the community where companies reside. And so when we think of what makes a great leader, it's being able to lead everyone regardless of difference, and being intentional about how you incorporate that difference so that you have outcomes that include all the people present. And so if there's any way that we can support organizations at Career Thrivers, or support you on your journey, even as an individual woman leader, Black woman leader, woman of color, feel free to connect. We drop a podcast called, you guessed it, Let's Thrive Together. You can go to let'sthrivetogether.com to learn more about it, and just sharing insights to help you thrive in the work that you're doing. I personally believe that because we spend the vast majority of our Monday through Friday, best hours of the day, when the sun is shining, when it's nice outside, at work or associated with it, it should be a place where you are boldly thriving and not just barely surviving. And that is my hope and wish for all of us. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And I need that first quote you just did. The first part you said about diversity. Go ahead, put that in the chat. We're gonna throw that on social media. Amen. Sean.
Well, I definitely learned a lot from the panelists, and I really encourage all the attendees to get a mentor or coach, because a lot of times that's where we fall short. We don't see ourselves in leadership roles, so we don't seek out how to get there. And sometimes it's your peer mentors. It may not be anyone in that seat to mentor you, or who is bold enough to mentor you. So you start with your peers, and if that doesn't work, you go outside of that circle and start looking for others. Coaching and mentoring is really key to making sure that we have the tools and we're able to find our voice in the process.
Thank you so much, Sean. And last but not least, Cam.
Yeah, so I would say immediately, lead with grace and then educate. People know what they know, and if you're doing diversity work or inclusion work or belonging work, you got to lead with grace. You got to allow people to the best way I've found to change hearts and minds is let people be who they are, right? And then respond with education, respond with data, with become a helpmate to individuals. So I would say lead with grace and then educate, right? It's tough sometimes, because when people get comfortable, they say some of the weirdest things to you, but they're comfortable. So in that comfort, especially as inclusion practitioners, we have a duty to ensure that they're educated and they understand that, it's a time and a place, and most times it's never the time to say what you're thinking, so make sure we lead with grace is one of the most important things. Also, I would tell everyone, Black Men in Tech is for you. All right. So I would say definitely follow us on socials at BLK MENINTECH at BLK Black Men in Tech. Please, we're doing some amazing events, and we're really moving the pipeline. We have over 200 people that's been sourced and hired through our organization. Our summer is going to be full of events in different cities all over the country. So wherever in your city, please, please come come out and just be a part of what we're doing. Also, our annual conference, this will be the 4th year, is in October the 10th through the 13th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Our conference is called, Brittany, guess what? Thrive. Right. So, it's a really great opportunity. 15% of the individuals are in our organization are women. All right. So please come out. Please be a part. If you want more information, please hit me on LinkedIn. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel. This was really, really good. So thank you for the invite.
Well, I want to say thank you all to our panelists, first of all, for your time. For the 5, I will tell you the #1 person who won one of Brittany's books is Rika Holmes. She was the first person to log on. For the other 4, I will reach out to you by email to get your mailing address so I can mail you your books. I want to say thank you guys so much for being a part of this panel. This is our first event. We're super excited. The Climb is a new organization, but we really are committed to increasing the number of women of color in leadership. And the only way we can do that is to have some of these frank discussions and talk about how we can move forward or not move forward, right? Because leadership is not for everyone in corporate and public spaces. But thank you so much. If you are looking to join the Climb, go to theclimb.org. Membership is free, and we'll continue to have events like this bi-monthly. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll make sure that I send out information both about Cam and Brittany's organizations for you in email. You guys have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.